In our last episode, the empire's fate was carved up in Berlin. Britain seized Cyprus, Austria occupied Bosnia, and France looked to Tunisia. Russia still loomed in the Balkans, and Britain soon took Egypt itself, turning the Suez Canal into a British highway to India. Abdulhamid looked at the map and saw his empire boxed in, shrinking piece by piece, permitted to live only so long as Europe found it useful. This is road to destruction, the world wars. After Berlin, Abdulhamid withdrew, and he was not alone in his fears. Across Europe, monarchs whispered of daggers and bombs. Revolutionaries stalked the streets of Paris, St. Petersburg, and Vienna. If Europe's emperors were not safe, how could the sultan of a crumbling empire be? He abandoned the old palaces of the Bosphorus and made Yildiz Palace his fortress. Behind its high walls, he created a world of shadows. Audiences with the Sultan were rare, courtiers trembled, ministers plotted, but all knew the Sultan's eyes were everywhere. That was no metaphor. Abdulhamid built one of the most extensive intelligence networks of the 19th century, the Hafiye Teşkilatı, the secret police. Every coffeehouse, every mosque, every newspaper had ears. Reports flowed daily to Yildiz, thousands of pages filled with whispers of disloyalty, rumors of sedition, even gossip from the bazaars. At its head stood men like Shakir Pasha, who oversaw the flow of intelligence, and Fehim Pasha, a name whispered in fear, notorious for turning suspicion into exile and exile into death. To the people of Istanbul, the Hafiye were not shadows. They had faces, and they were everywhere. And suspicion meant exile, or worse. The most famous victim was Midhat Pasha, once hailed as the father of the constitution. First banished to Europe, then sent to the distant fortress of Taif, he was strangled in his cell in 1884, a final vengeance for Abdulaziz's death and a warning to all reformers. Namık Kemal, the fiery poet of liberty, was packed off to Cyprus, where he wrote under guard until his death. Radical journalist Ali Suavi attempted to storm Turan Palace in 1878 to free Murad V. He was killed on the spot, his blood on the stones a lesson for all who dreamed of change. Each disappearance, each sudden death reinforced the same message. The Sultan was listening, and the Sultan struck first. Yet Abdulhamid did not rule by fear alone. He rebuilt the empire with schools and railways. Mektebi Mulkiye trained civil servants for a modern bureaucracy. Mektebi Tubiye expanded as a medical school, producing doctors for the army and provinces. Mektebi Harbiye, the military academy, was reorganized with German instructors. Young officers drilled in Prussian discipline, their minds sharpened for war. Dozens of new idadi, secondary schools, rose across Anatolia. For the first time, children in distant provinces learned mathematics, geography, and foreign languages under a centralized Ottoman curriculum. But education was also control. Textbooks praised the Sultan, censored history, and framed loyalty as the highest virtue. The empire was modernizing, but on Abdulhamid's terms. Not to create citizens, but subjects. Railways too were laid across Anatolia and the Balkans, but they were not lifelines of commerce. They were arteries of control, designed to move troops swiftly, to crush revolts, to remind distant provinces that the Sultan's hand could reach them. Farmers still hauled their grain by cart, soldiers traveled by train. And to bind the empire spiritually, Abdulhamid revived the title of Caliph. Previous sultans had worn it lightly. Abdulhamid wielded it as a weapon. He sent envoys to India, to North Africa, to Central Asia, proclaiming himself protector of all Muslims against Christian empires. Pamphlets, sermons, and proclamations cast him as the shadow of Allah on earth, a bulwark for the faithful. But if Islam united abroad, it divided at home. Christian subjects, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, were now painted, subtly at first, then more openly, as potential traitors. If Europe used Christians as pretexts for intervention, Abdulhamid would brand them as fifth columns. Pan-Islamism was both shield and sword, and soon it would be stained with blood. Abroad, the Sultan's alliances shifted. Britain and France demanded reform, then carved away Egypt and Tunisia. Austria sat astride Bosnia, administering it in a humiliating limbo, Ottoman in name, Habsburg in practice. Encircled, Abdulhamid turned to Germany. Bismarck had hosted Berlin, rewarding his friends Austria and Russia, but Germany did not join in the feast. Instead, it courted the Sultan, railways, military advisors, and sympathetic words. In 1883, the German general Colmar von der Goltz, Goltz Pasha, arrived to modernize the Ottoman army. For Abdulhamid, who trusted no one, Germany seemed a friend, or at least an alternative to the predators of London and Paris. Yet the reality remained hollow. Schools trained students, but also radicalized them. Railways carried soldiers, but not prosperity. Pan-Islamism impressed abroad, but deepened suspicion at home. Abdulhamid had built a new empire of surveillance, loyalty, and religion, but beneath the facade, it was brittle. The newspapers whispered a name that would outlast all his reforms: the Red Sultan. In our next episode, the Armenian question, repression and resistance. The promises of Berlin are betrayed, Armenian Christians demand reform, and Abdulhamid swings the sword of Osman, answering them in blood. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.